Welcome back to Man Vs Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're bringing you a review. This one's from a game that was just released at Essen. It's called Altiplano. It is a 2 to 5 player game that's designed by the same guy that did Orleans. This is a Reiner Stockhausen game.
Yeah, and you can absolutely tell this thing just came back from Essen hot.
Yeah.
We went to great lengths to get a hold of this thing. And if you're a fan of Orleans, this is going to be something very familiar to you for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So this takes place in the highland plateaus of the Andes Mountains, and you're trying to go out and gather resources and collect them in both your warehouse and on your player board in order to try to get in-game points and points during the game itself. So.
Yeah, this is a Euro in the most traditional sense in terms of you're pushing resources all over the place, using your bag to do so, converting them to other resources and trying to convert ultimately all of that into points.
Yeah, so if you've played Orleans before, it has a lot of the same DNA in the game. You're going to be collecting resources, placing in your bag, randomly drawing them out, putting them into a planning stage, and then pushing those out onto your player board in order to do specific actions like trading them into different types of resources. What's different though is no longer do you have a player board. You have all these modular spaces that are randomly put out into the center of the table. There's 7 different types of locations, and where you place them is completely dependent upon the players.
Yeah, you can randomly put these things out there, which adds right off the bat a nice little layer of variability in the game, because one of the things that this game has going on for it is the actions on your player board are associated with these boards out on the table, and you're moving a little avatar or meeple around. You have to be at the location in order to use that area on your player board, which adds a whole layer of play.
Yeah, so there are 7 different regions. They all have different names, like you have the harbor, you have the mountains, you have the roads, and each of them hold a specific type of either resource or card or carts or corn. They all have, which is great, it's built into the actual tile itself. It tells you the number of players, 2 to 5 players, and how many of each type of resource to place right on the tile. So you don't have to look at the rule book.
Yeah, that's not a gameplay review, but please, board game companies, take note. That is fantastic. You really, once you've played this game once, you really don't need the rule book to set this thing up. You can just lay these things out there and it tells you right there. That is awesome.
Not only that, but it also tells you how much or how many victory points everything is worth for the tiles that are associated there. So if you look at this particular area, which is the farmlands, it tells you right below each of these tiles how many victory points there were. So again, you don't have to really look at a rule book, but if you want to know elsewhere, they give you a little tile that runs through that as well.
They've really done a fantastic job of that. We always are begging for more information on the components, and they've nailed it on this.
So the player board itself has a number of different locations. Right in the center of the player board itself is your cart. You're allowed to, as David said, move your meeple around the board in order to enact the locations that you're going to. Also, there is a particular location that matches each of these individual areas within the game. So all these areas also have different conversion rates for taking one resource and changing it into another. And at the very bottom of the board, the bottom right corner, is your housing or planning area. This is where you're going to be drawing the tiles out of your bag and then placing them in order to take the actions.
Right. Yeah, at the beginning of the game, you're actually going to take a roll card that gives you variable amounts of the resources that you're going to use in your bag, which is quite a bit different than Orleans, its big brother, because everyone starts with the same thing here. So right off the bat, this game really kind of sets the tone that this is going to be a more variable experience for sure.
Not only that, but it also gives you a variable ability. So each of the rolls not only gives you something to start with, but it gives you an ability that is different than all the other players within the game. You're also going to know this little cart here. This is pretty cool. Anytime you collect resources or use resources, they go into the cart now instead of in the bag. And when you can't draw any more tiles from the bag, you then dump this into the bag to be able to draw. So there's some strategy on how quickly you want to cycle through those particular tiles.
Yeah, it adds a layer, a couple different layers that you just don't get in Orleans, because in this one, in Orleans, you're putting everything right and straight away. So there's always a nice chance that you get that one new tile that you just grabbed. In this one, that doesn't necessarily always happen. Now, on the flip side, the good news is you're always going to go through all of your tiles. So if you get that one tile in your bag and you can't find it, that won't happen here. You'll eventually get them out there.
Also, each player will start with 2 objectives. Now, at the start, every player is going to be dealt 3 objectives, no matter the number of players. And they're going to choose one that they think that they can complete. The other 2 that are left over, they're going to pass to the players on the left and the right, and then that player will have to choose from those 2 final cards which one they want to complete, which is pretty cool. In a 2-player game, it's a little bit different. You're going to draw 3, you're going to pick one, and you're going to give 1 to the other player, making them do that 1, and they have to and you discard the other one, which is pretty cool. So again, to start the game, each player is going to take a roll. They're going to take those tiles and place them onto their planning center. It's the only time that happens. Typically, anytime you get tiles, they go in here, and then you got to cycle them through the bag. But for right from the start, you place them onto your board. You also will probably get some money. The money will be used at the market to be able to buy particular things.
Right.
Let's talk about the expansion boards too, because this is really important. You're going to notice a place that's not part of your island here in order to take actions. This is the expansion board. The expansion board allows you to get particular tiles and attach them to your board, either giving you really special abilities or to do different types of conversions that you typically can't do. And the reason for that is because a lot of these areas or a lot of these different resources you can't get with your basic board actions. They're called rare resources. And the only way to get them is either through a canoe action or from going to one of these extension areas, collecting this, and then be able to do a special conversion.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and not only the secondary resources, but even some of the basic resources that aren't worth any points are things that some players won't start with. So one player might be saying, you know, where are you guys getting all your alpacas? I don't have alpacas to make food. So that player has to do something else to make food. For instance, you can use fish to do that.
Yeah.
So you start out with those variable powers, but in a way, you want to do some things right away to sort of balance the odds a little bit and sort of fix your guy so that he can do some of the things your opponents can.
Yeah, one more thing I want to talk about before I start getting into the actual turn-by-turn structure. Each player is also going to have a warehouse in front of them. Again, going back to the theme of Altiplano, you're in the high Andes, you're trying to store as many goods for the winter as you possibly can. You're going to notice a warehouse board. What you'll be doing is storing like types of warehouses in rows across the bottom, and each of these will give you a number of victory points depending on how many of those rows you're able to finish. We'll get into that a little bit more as we start talking about the gameplay. So the game is really, really simple. It's every round consists of 4 different phases, and the first phase is simply the drawing phase. This is where all the players will draw tiles from their bag depending upon the number of spaces they have available. Now at the start of the game, each player only has 4 spaces available for them to put stuff into their planning. That can be expanded up to 8 through going to the road action, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So however, each player is going to draw up to the number of tiles. Again, it's very similar to Orleans. If I only have, let's say for instance, I only have 4 spaces available, but I have 3 already here from a previous turn, I can only draw 1 into this area, and that's simply how that works.
Right, so the next stage is the planning phase.
Yep.
And this is done simultaneously. You don't have to do this turn by turn. So everyone can then take the tokens that they've put in their planning phase and determine where they want to put them on their player boards. You're going to do this, and that leads to the next
actions. Yeah, so the planning, we'll talk real quickly about planning. When you plan, you're placing them onto your player board. Each of these have different types and numbers that you can have on them, and they correlate with the actions by doing specific types of tiles into specific areas. But not only can you place them on your player board, as we said, you also have your roll and any of the extension boards, so you can place them in any of those particular areas.
Yeah, and also planning is the key here, because not only are you going to be putting your tokens on your player board, but you also have to take a look at where your meeple is out in the board that you've built on the table, because if you've put all of your tokens in areas that you can't necessarily reach in one turn,
you can't take the action.
You're not going to be able to take that action.
Right, and that's very important because, like we said at the very start, in the center you have the actual cart, and you're only allowed to move once for free up to 3 spaces in any direction. You can increase that by getting more carts and adding food to that cart to expand your movements to be able to take actions in multiple different areas instead of just 1 or 2 areas. So.
Right.
All right, so the next thing is the actions. Once you've placed your things upon the board, you then get to take the actions of the areas that you are at. And this is a turn-by-turn. It's one of the few times in the game where things will happen in a turn-by-turn basis. Starting with the guy that has that awesome little standee there.
Yes, this is an alpaca. We named him Alvin while we were playing.
So that player will be able to take their first action, and they simply choose what they wish to do. If they're at the location where they wish to take the action, they simply remove those tiles from their board, place them in there, and then take the action that's below it, depending upon which resources they turn in. If they choose not to take the action of where they are, they have to move. And when they move, they simply slide this over, and they're either allowed to move 1 to 3 spaces in any clockwise or counterclockwise area, going to a new location, and then taking that action immediately.
Yeah, so the good news is that one cart move that you have is going to be able to get you to any location that you might need to get to.
Yeah.
It's also important to note when you're at a location using the actions at that location, you can only use one action at a time. You can't do everything you can possibly do at that one location. So you're going to have to take your time as it comes back around the table.
Yeah, so timing in this game is really, really key. Leaving your meeple in the right position for the next round is just as important as moving around to take the actions that turn, because you will be planning stuff on here, but you don't necessarily have to take the actions. You can simply push all of your resources out, keep them there, just like Orleans, and then take those actions in a future turn.
Yeah, that is a big difference with Orleans. In the early parts of playing this game for the first time, you're going to experience that moment where you're like, I'll do this, and then someone says, well, but you're not at that location. You've totally forgotten that. So that extra layer of moving your meeple around the board really definitely makes you have to think things through a little bit more.
So we could talk about all 7 of these different locations. We're not. Most of them are just simple conversions from one resource type to another. For instance, we'll talk about the farmlands. If I take an alpaca here and I'm in the farmlands, I can simply take this alpaca, put them into my thing, and then immediately take food according to whatever that conversion rate on there. There's a lot of these different locations on there depending upon what you do. Now, there are different types of locations that allow you to get cards. Let's talk about those cards, because those are super important. I'll talk about the first one. One of them is simply building huts, and that is located right here. When you turn in any 2 stone, you're allowed to look through this entire deck of cards. These cards aren't in order, so you can go through them and look at them any way you so wish. Each hut that you build at the end of the game is worth 4 victory points, plus it makes particular types of resources that you've gathered through the game more victory points. Now, the cool thing about this is that you're never expending these resources.
Yeah.
So the resources that I use to build that hut, which are 2 stone, they don't go away. They simply go back in my bag and recycle. And that's the same for all of these different locations, except one of them, which is orders.
Yeah, with orders, this is part of the market section. And there's a lot of different things you can do with the market section. But as it relates to the orders, one of the things you can do is spend your turn, spend money. In this case, you don't even need a resource on that section to do this. You spend money, $1, and again, take the whole stack of orders, look through them, find whichever one you want, you place that face up in front of you. You can only have one of these at any given time, one unfulfilled order. Once you've filled it, which is another action you can take at the market, then you can take another order. This is a significant way to score points. There's a lot of ways of scoring, but these are some pretty big point scoring opportunities.
Yeah, the other card that you're going to see on the table is the canoes. That's done in the harbor when you trade in 2 pieces of wood. Again, you can look through the entire stack. Each canoe is worth 2 victory points at the end of the game, but they also are one of the very few ways in the game to get rare resources, because whenever you buy them, they give you like a fish or an alpaca or whatever it may
you'll
be.
instantly get that token. Like we said at the beginning of the game, sometimes you start the game with a roll that doesn't have a certain thing that maybe everyone else does. So that's a great place to go as quickly as you can to get that one token you need.
2 other things I want to talk about with these player actions. One is how do you get more planning center actions. One of them is the only way is to go to the road, and that's by this bottom resource area down here, which requires a wood and a stone. And this is simply a track that you'll be moving down through the course of the game, opening new things for you. It either opens up a new number where you can have more resources to plan with, or it's going to open one of the corn tiles to collect. Now, let's talk about the actual warehouse itself and how the corn and your resources will get filtered into these areas.
Exactly. Starting with corn, when you take a corn, you have to place it in your warehouse. So when you place things in your warehouse, you fill in from the bottom left first, and there's some rules here. Like Jeremy said at the beginning, you're going to have to fill up each shelf with like resources. Now, corn is a bit of a wild resource. However, if you start a row with corn, the whole row has to be corn. So going on throughout the game, you're going to use this action with corn and another space to take resources and put them in your warehouse, always starting on the leftmost part of a shelf unless you need to finish off that same resource on another lower shelf.
Yeah. Now, there's two important things that we need to mention. As we said, anytime you take or use your resources from your board, they immediately go in here, plus the resource you've collected. So you're going to be cycling these through the game. The only time that you won't get those resources back are for the orders. Once you fulfill an order, those tiles will stay on there permanently for the rest of the game. And they're not worth victory points at the end of the game because these orders themselves are worth a massive amount of victory points. The other time is the warehouse. When you fill things in your warehouse, they too will remain there for the rest of the game. But they will score you victory points according to the chart where some of the resources are worth varying amounts of points.
Yeah, and the warehouse can be a significant place to get points. Not only are you going to score the points for the resources there, like Jeremy said, but each of these shelves graduates to more and more points. If you were able to fill your entire warehouse, which would be a challenging task in this game, you're getting 20 points for that top shelf. In all, that's what, about 100 points from the warehouse.
Yeah. And then once all the players are done with all their actions, it simply goes to a new round. It's going to pass the new player, and you repeat this process. Now, the game is going to end in one of two different ways. The first way is if any one of the 7 different island tiles has no anything on it, and that means both cards and resources. So if I'm looking at the harbor here and it has no more fish and no more canoes, that will signify the end of the game. But it's got to be everything on that tile. Or if we've gone through all the extension boards. Now, these extension boards will pass through the course of the game. If a player buys one, this will slide down and a new one comes in. If no one buys one, one will slide off. So this is kind of a timer within the game itself. And these will cost money too by going to the market. We didn't really mention these, but each of them has a sliding scale as well on how much you have to spend. So newer ones cost more than ones that have been out in the market for quite some time.
Yeah, one last thing on the extension board. It is a stacked deck here, so there's meatier and juicier tiles later in that stack.
Yep. And once the game is over, you're going to count up all of your victory points. Now, there's a variety of different victory points. All the huts you built are worth 4 victory points, and they give each of the resources 1 more victory point according to whatever it says at the top. Each of the canoes is worth 2 victory points. Each of the orders that you fulfilled is worth an X number of victory points. And of course, any of the shelves that you have built are worth victory points. And then all the resources are worth some as well.
Right, and finally, if you're using the objective cards or the mission cards, those are going to be some significant points too. Some of these are end of game type cards. Some of them will happen in the midst of a game, like be the first one to do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, I have 2 in front of me here that says simply collect 3 of the red resources and 3 of the white, and another one that says to have the most stone in my warehouse at the end of the game. And those will give you a significant amount of victory points too, 16 in this case when you add them both together. So that's Altiplano in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, for sure.
What do you think?
I like it. I mean, you know, I'm a big fan of Orleans. Orleans is my #1 game of all time, as of our last top 10.
Yeah.
This one is very, very similar. Like Jeremy said at the beginning, there's a lot of DNA here that is a common thread for sure. Now, this one, in a way, it's streamlined, but at the same time, it's more traditional. Like a traditional Euro, like I said, you're really mostly just pushing resources, converting resources, turning them into points. Whereas, I mean, you're doing that in most Euros, but with Orleans, the variety of what you're doing on the board seems more significant. Like this is all very resource-based, whereas in Orleans, there's, you know, the scholar track, the map, all sorts of different things to look at. It's a little bit more of a thematic thing going on with Orleans than this, I think. But I like this game. I think if you own Orleans, if you're a huge fan of it, you'll enjoy this game. Is it too similar to Orleans? That I don't know. I need to play it certainly quite a bit more to determine that.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things about it. First, the pedigree of the game itself. Reiner did a great job with Orleans, and this kind of has a disadvantage to it because it already has expansions with the original Orleans, which just made it, Trade and Intrigue made it tremendously better, and it's just a fantastic game. So this is following in the footsteps of that game. The other thing, Clemens Franz, I mean, his artwork is so diverse in everything he does, but he has this tone to it that's just perfect. I love his artwork, and everything that he touches. And when you look at this box is just cool. I mean, it's just a really neat box.
It is.
Pops. It's just...
It's different.
It is
It's
different.
very different. In fact, I didn't realize it was Clemens Franz just by looking at the alpaca here. I had to look at the people because there's usually a person on the front of his boxes.
The other a couple pros I'll say, number one is I think that Reiner has a really good system. In the same way that Uwe Rosenberg has developed this like really cool system over the years with all these different games, I feel like Orleans is here. This is kind of a step back for me, but I feel like he'll get there and there'll be this perfect bag building game that he will make in the future. And I feel like all these different components, he's just working through the steps right now, trying to find the right mix of everything.
I would agree. I'd like to see him hold on to that bag building thing.
Yep.
And not that these, I think both of these games are fantastic. But like you said, like Uwe's done over the years, and then with for Feast for Odin, almost kind of like his magnum opus. There's a bag building mechanic that's just hits the sweet spot. I think the evolution of this one over Orleans, where you're using this sort of like middle grounds for the tokens that then go back into your bag, I have to admit, I'm not sure whether I like that better or not. It has its sort of pros and cons to it as a player, but I think it's an interesting evolution of what he did before.
And whether you like it or not, playing a game that has this bag in here and drawing things from it, it's just fun. It's just it's cool. It's neat. Like, what am I going to get next? I don't know. I know that resource is in there, and I really need it for this particular action. That whole aspect is just a fun portion. Now, there are cons that I have to say, and there's quite a few of them here. They're not necessarily awful. One is that I don't feel like it treads any new ground, like it's any different than Orleans. There's some movement around here, and there's some different boards, but I feel like essentially it's the same style of game that you're playing.
Certainly, I would agree. Like you said, there's a lot of DNA that's shared here between the two. I do think, on that same point, I do think the evolution of the bag building for sure, and I do think, like you just mentioned, the movement around this, it adds a distinct layer that you really have to get used to. And those are two differences that I think people are going to either say, oh, I like this better than Orleans, or, oh, I missed the way we did it in Orleans.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure whether that evolution is going to land with everybody, but it's definitely an extra layer of thinking for both of those things.
Yeah, it kind of sucks that this falls right behind Orleans, and the fact that if
Right.
that didn't exist, this game would probably be more appealing in that sense.
Yeah, Orleans casts quite a shadow, for sure.
One of the other things, or a couple things, we haven't played this a whole lot. So I found, and maybe this is just an inherent thought, that there may be a lack of scoring in the game. There's only a few very distinct ways to score points. Your orders are huge, and then your canoes and your buildings that you can build. I didn't find as much variety in the warehouse, and the reason for that is because I don't feel like getting rid of those resources early game is a good idea, because you need those resources to power other things. Again, I haven't played this enough to know if that exists or not, but that's just an initial feeling that I got from playing it.
There are different... I kind of felt that way as well, but I will say in one of our games, there was a few different things going on between the different players. For instance, I had a bit of an engine that really benefited from the money that I was making, more so than you and Gary when we played. And then in that same game, Gary definitely utilized his warehouse much more than the two of us. Much more than me, for sure.
Like crazy.
Oh, and you built canoes and houses like an insane amount. But your point about the warehouse is interesting because my money machine kept me from not wanting to put those richer resources in my warehouse because I needed them to build money. And because I had tiles that were allowing me to use money in ways that these guys couldn't.
Yeah.
So there is some, definitely, it's got that same thing where you can take some different routes to your points, but it's not as, maybe it's not as immediately as flavored as the theme that's going on in Orleans when you're taking those extra buildings and like building your engine there.
The last thing I wanted to mention, and this may be just me, and I know it just doesn't pertain to you at all, but this has almost zero player interaction. When I mean zero, I mean really close to zero. You aren't blocking people from going to any locations. The only true player interaction in this game is when you give someone a card at the start, making them do that, or taking a particular type of canoe, but that's not a huge point swing by any means.
No, not huge point swings. I think the main type of player interaction, the way I'd characterize that, are anything you can take off of the table.
Yeah.
So when I take an extension that Jeremy might have wanted, when I take a card that Jeremy might have wanted, those sorts of things. Again, That's not traditional player interaction.
Seldom, though, that would affect another player, I would think.
No, well, certainly, maybe in larger player counts, the battle for those things might be a little bit more significant, especially the canoe and the house cards with 4 or even 5 players.
Yeah.
You're not going to get many of those. So if you can get there quickly and abuse that and grab what you can, those cards are really nice because they're going to give you straight up points. Plus, like the houses give you an extra point for some of the resources you're collecting.
Yeah. I was just surprised that you couldn't block people from going to particular locations. Because you're free to go wherever you so choose to go.
That is one of those questions that I think will immediately come up when people first start playing this. They'll say, oh, wait, can I go here? Because you're there. Yeah. And the answer is yes. That would be interesting to see if like when they designed this, if there were some aspects along the road that got cut away, for instance, going somewhere and then having to pay that person something.
Please don't take my negativity as anything bad about the game.
Oh, no.
Structurally, mechanically, it's really cool. Great artwork. Again, it has a very large shadow from Orleans, which is your favorite game of all time. You know, Orleans is such a perfect mix of bag building and worker placement type things, and it's just really neat game.
And it's gotten better and better with these expansions. So.
But this is cool. It's worth playing.
Yes,
for
absolutely.
Sure. So it is Altiplano. 2 to 5 players, takes about an hour to 2 hours, depending on the number of players. If you guys have questions, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, everything else that we do here. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Season 2 of Man Vs Meeple is sponsored in part by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.